short and shrinking. I want to begin by letting you all know I'm really kind of nervous, and not because it was difficult to find some nice things to say about my pal. When the family called me and asked if I would say a few things here today, I sat down and I penciled some things out. Only a couple hours worth, so don't bear with me. When I finished writing it, I called Judy in because I wanted to read it to her and have her critique the message. I started reading it and I couldn't get through a sentence. It was amazing. I was blubbering and I had tears rolling down my face, and this was about a guy I knew better than any other guy in the world. And I had not felt so sorrowful until that moment. And I told Judy, I said, I don't think I can get through this. I just can't do this. And she looked at me and she said, yes, you can. Yes, you will. I'm going to be there with you. So here she is. Because if I fall over, she'll catch me. So I hope that if I stumble a little bit, that you'll just bear with me. When we received the news on Al, Judy and I were in the middle of a 1 month long selling trip in Montana. And as you might expect, it created kind of a dilemma for us. Do we cancel 2 weeks worth of appointments that Judy had made and head back home? Or do we miss Al's services? Be here today. Well, the question became WWAW. Not what would Jesus do? What would Al want? There was no question in Al's mind how much I loved him. So that wasn't it. You know, we talked about all the things that had gone on and what we had to do. And we said, well, Al would just tell us, stay out there, finish your trip. It's no big thing. He knew it. So that was kind of our decision. Sorry. I'm not used to being in front of a church. Okay, I go to church, I'm just not a... So our decision was that we were going to stay out there and we were going to finish 2 weeks. That was until we phoned our 2 children. And that was when I learned I was at the age where I had much more to learn from my children than they had to learn from me. Their message was loud and clear. Being here today at this service is about Al's family and his friends. Here we are. At this time, I'd really like to have my 2 children come up here and join me. I know they're all embarrassed. Probably my surprise. I'm here so you can be here. I'll start off by saying that the Leonard family and the Gibson family have a long history together. Picnics, 4th of July celebrations, family get-togethers, camping trips, even in the rain, and much, much more. So here we are, all grown up. Now, if you think that all of my remarks today are going to be all sad and teary-eyed, you're sadly mistaken, because we're here to talk about a life well lived. And that was my buddy. It's natural that all of Al's family and all of us friends are deeply saddened by his sudden departure, no question about that. As his friend for over 50 years, I am having difficulty thinking about life without him because he's been such a big part of mine. Sorry. But I want to tell you something else. Al's passing is one thing, but Al's prayers were answered. All of you should know that Al never wanted to be a burden to his family. Not for 1 week, not for 1 minute. And as it happened, he was not. What did happen is that when Al passed on, he was surrounded by the people that he loved. And you can't ask for anything better than that, you guys. So I want to take a minute to kind of reflect upon his life and who he was. Without any doubt, Al was extremely passionate about every part of his life. His family, his friends, his country, his work, Bill, his God, and in the early part of his life, his beer and his Cheetos. Now, I first met Al in the mid-1960s, and he was president of a young men's leadership group called the NSJCs. And I was a brand new member, but it didn't take very long for us to become good friends and for me to recognize all of Al's skills and abilities. I want to show you something. Okay. I'm only going to take off this. I won't gross you out by any means. But this is where Al and I began. Now, I mentioned his skills and his abilities. One skill and ability that Al didn't have was telling jokes. And Al had some really good jokes, there was no question about that. But I remember him getting a bunch of us around and he'd start telling a joke. But by the time he'd get to the punchline, he was laughing at it and giggling and tears rolling down his face so hard, nobody knew what he was trying to say. So we had to wait for him to compose himself, so we could figure out what he said. And in most cases, watching Al was funnier than the joke itself. Okay. Now, some years later, I went to work in a company that belonged to Al, Don McCandless, and Al's mom, Vi. And during those early times, Al and I did a lot of traveling together. And on one occasion, we were heading back to Wisconsin in Al's convertible for a meeting, a sales meeting. And for the life of me, I can't remember if planes were invented or not, but you know Al, we were driving a few thousand miles. On the way, we stopped in Spokane, and we met up with Al's son, Butch. And Butch was driving his own car, and once again, it's been a long, long time ago, and I don't remember why Butch wasn't riding with us, but he was taking his own vehicle. Sometime later, we're in the middle of North Dakota. I always want to say Carolina, North Dakota, on this long, boring stretch that they have out there. And I told Al, I have an idea. So I told him what it was, and I said, pull up alongside Butch. And when we did, he's laughing already, he remembers now. So when we got alongside of his car, I dropped my trowels. I stuck my hair around Butch. And I wish you all could have been there. Double take. And the car is close to me like this. Then I got nervous he was going to run off the road. I looked over at Big Al. He's laughing like, man, I thought he peed himself quite frankly. And a few miles down the road, here comes Butch's car right alongside of us. And Butch holds up a sign, ugly butt. And I didn't know if he was talking about my rear end or me. It's just one of those things. Point being is that Al was always good for a laugh, and he loved a great laugh. Even if it was at his own expense, because most of us picked on him all the time. But for everyone being around Al, it was always a lot of fun and great time. Fun and funny was who he was all about, and it was a big part of his life, and that's just who Al was. I also remember, and you guys are going to appreciate this one too, this trip down memory lane for me was good and bad. But I remember Al in his earlier days, he kind of fancied himself as a pretty good athlete. I remember that with some giggles, okay? He loved watching sports and he loved playing sports. And we played softball together and some golf and some tennis. And on one occasion, we were going out to play tennis one morning. And Al had played a lot more tennis than I had. Sorry, I'm stumbling a little bit here, but he had played a lot more tennis. He came to this match with me with a game plan. He was going to serve the ball to me. He was going to charge up to the net. And then when I returned it to him, he was going to smack it right down my throat. So I would just lob the ball back over his head where he couldn't reach it. Those of you closest to Al know that it didn't take him very long to get agitated. And it wasn't long before I saw a tennis racket flying through the air. I can't stand this poop. Let's go to work. And it was off to work we went. And those of you that know Al know that I did exchange the word poop for the one that he really used. Another time, it was a beautiful spring morning, and we were going to head out for a pleasant round of golf. I know what's coming. Okay. Probably the third or the fourth hole, Al had completed one of the most horrific rounds of golf that I had ever witnessed in my life. And once again, there goes a 9-iron flying through the air, crashed into a tree. True story. Wouldn't tell a lie in church. Much. So it was, once again, end of golf. Off to work we went. I will tell you that the golf club went further than a lot of the balls he played. That was my buddy. You know, the point that I want to make with this little issue in his life is that none of Al's actions were about poor sportsmanship. We're just talking about a man that had very high expectations for himself and for all the people that he cared about the most. That was my buddy. The longer that I knew Al, the more respect I had for him. I knew him a while. Also, most of you probably know Al was a true patriot. Okay, he was a Republican, but still a patriot. He loved his country, and he was willing to do most anything he could to make it safer and better. Al served our country as a jet pilot during the Korean conflict. And during that time, or afterwards, of course, Al described to me a number of the not-so-fun experiences that he had in his time in the military. One was he had a jet shot down and he had to be rescued. And I think you all know that military time and service can be brutal, especially in times of war. Interestingly, though, Al just wasn't the normal type of military man. Because I always found it strange. When I was in the Army, you know, we didn't talk as nice as you did when you were not in the Army. But Al, I never remember him once telling me about his military service and him dropping an F-bomb. Sorry, he didn't do it. And I remember when I was in the Army, we used F-bombs just to get somebody to pass you the salt. So, but that wasn't our buddy. Al was a really kind and gentle human being and man. And he cared about almost everything in his life in a very, very, very positive manner. In fact, Pastor Bill and Tom and I were talking about this earlier today. Very positive. And as far as I know, Al never even swore at me, and I know I gave him plenty of reasons to do so. Now, Al was one of the hardest working and most dedicated people that I had ever known. He put more into each day than the average person. He was in sales, and that would mean that he'd be out on the road traveling, calling on customers all throughout his territory. He'd get up early each morning and he'd head out for a day of selling. But often he wouldn't know exactly who all he was going to see or even where he'd end up. You see, Al was really great at selling, but not so great at organizing his sales calls and his travel. In fact, I know I would talk to Al on a Friday night. He'd say, "Oh yeah, Dick, I'm getting up early Monday morning, I'm heading to Montana." I'd talk to him Monday night and he was in Southern Oregon. It worked for Al, and he made a career out of it. So that was our guy. Now Al just always wasn't on the road just selling. Al was out there calling on customers who had become longtime friends of his. And as you know, Judy and I also travel in Montana on selling trips, and we call on many of the same customers as Al. And we've always been amazed at how they would always tell us that Al would come in and he'd do a little business for about an hour, And then he'd spend another hour or two talking about families or how they might improve their business or any number of topics that they call about. And that was his life. Loved him. Enough of that. We always thought it was kind of interesting that Al could develop those kind of relationships with his erratic travel schedules and popping in on people and keeping everybody guessing the way that he did. But he was amazing. And Al was not only a super patriot and a good salesman, he was also a friend to many of us. And all throughout the United States, Al has a great number of friends, and he is held in very high respect, believe me. Even since the news of his passing got out, we were contacted by a number of people that we didn't even know Al was friends with. Didn't know he did have that many friends. Just kidding. We share many of them, and Al's ability to warm everybody up was just amazing. And lastly, and most importantly, though, I'd say you all know, because you all is there, Al deeply loved his family. Al was a son, he was a brother, he was a husband, he was a father, he was a grandfather, he was a great-grandfather. And the Lord knows that Al and Myrna create a gaggle of family about the size of most small towns in Montana. Wow. He was very close to his mother and father also. And I remember one time Al came over to Judy's and my house in Shoreline just to visit. And he brought his dad, Al Sr., with him. Now, Al Sr. was suffering from Alzheimer's at the time, but Al just wanted to get him out. And so he brought him over. We were in the living room, and both Als were sitting next to one another. And Al and I were discussing the great difficulties of raising sons. Yes. Yes. He knew it too. He knew it too. So we're having a discussion, and right in the middle of it, Al Sr. pops up and he said, "You know, Mom and I always wanted to have a son. We were playing girls." True story. And Al, sitting next to him, just smiled and put his arm around his head. That's the guy I knew. Okay? What I've tried to do here today is just kind of peel back some of the many layers that was Al's life, with me anyway. Fun, first of all, fun. Fun-loving, fun to be around, and when it was time to have a good time, Al was front and center. 2, this will really surprise you, Al was somewhat flawed from time to time. Just like each of us, Al wasn't always perfect. Surprise again. But in the end, his goodness would always shine through. The example of flying tennis rackets or golf clubs